Got a quick question. Did anybody lose their keys or their wallet this morning before you came to church? Anybody? Just by chance? No, not today, Larry? Yeah. Does everybody know what that feeling is, though, when you do lose your keys in your wallet and you're trying to go somewhere out the door? What is that experience like at your house? It's pure chaos at some point at my house. Like when I lose things, I get anxious, right? I'm filled with nerves and angst. Have you ever lost like something even more important than your keys or your wallet, like a pet? Lost a pet before? I remember one time Melissa called me. She used to work for WestJet, and they had very specific times, as you are probably encouraged to know, about when their flight attendants have to show up places, because people are expecting to travel. And she calls me this one day, and I'm at work, and she's like, Tim, the dog left the backyard, and I have to go to work. That was a whole other level of angst in our life. That was not a productive conversation. I felt helpless. She wanted help. She needed to find the dog. She needed to get to work. It was bedlam. The only thing I know that tops that is losing a child. Okay? And I don't know this personally, but I have been on the receiving end of being lost. And my mom still talks about it 45 years later. This is how I know that this is the top of the trauma tree. Because we don't go around talking about the day that we lost the dog, but my mom, with very little prompting, will love to tell you the story of the day she lost me at the mall in Moncton, New Brunswick. Okay? This is how it went. We were at the mall in Moncton, New Brunswick. At the department store. It was probably a Zellers at the time. And do you remember that the clothing racks, this is for all you 80s people, okay? The clothing racks used to have like storage lockers underneath them. Shelves, do you remember this, right? So I had a habit of playing hide and seek with my mom at our house. And when I would play hide and seek, I would just go and hide and then call for her, Mommy, come find me. Okay? Perfectly innocent game if you're at home. Less innocent if your mom is trying to figure out what to buy at Zellers and then turns around and all of a sudden her 4-year-old son is gone. And I had climbed into the rack. But she spent probably a good 10 minutes before she heard my little voice from some rack, 7 rows over. Mommy, come find me. Right? You maybe can imagine what that was like for her. You maybe can imagine what that feeling was. And this morning I want to talk a little bit about try and put ourselves in the position of understanding how God must feel when one of us is lost to him. And we can get an insight into that because Jesus actually spends a significant amount of time in the book of Luke trying to articulate to us how God feels about things that are lost to him. Significant amount of time because he doesn't just tell us one story or 2 stories, but 3 different stories about how God feels about what's lost to him. And what we're trying to do right now, we're in the middle of a series we're calling Deep and Wide. We're setting some theological foundations for what's coming next for us as a church. We believe that God has started to speak to us and call us to something next. It might not be brand new, but it's a continuation of the vision that God's been giving myself and our leadership team for a number of years right now. So we want to take some time just to kind of chat with you about the things that we think are important for you to know as best we can on a Sunday morning. And we're going to do a few other things. I mentioned last week that we're going to run a mini sort of one morning afternoon conference in January to discuss some of these things. Last week we talked about how important it is for churches to clear the road for people to find their way to God. How sometimes rules that we made, not rules that God made, become the thing that traps people in an unhelpful cycle of religion when what really people need to do is find their way to Jesus. That was about kind of how we do what we do. We talked about environments, and we talked about the way we behave when we're here, and the way maybe we behave out in the world. Today is about why that matters. Why that matters so much. Because as we found last week, clearing the road is not, it's not a new thing. It's not something that somebody made up in the 80s or 90s and started to call seeker sensitivity. And, it's not a new thing. And neither is what we're going to talk about today. Luke 15 shows us just how far God will go for someone that doesn't yet know him. This is what Luke says in chapter 15, starting at verse 1. Now the tax collectors, and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. By the way, when the Bible says that, they're not parsing us out, right? The Bible's really clear that we all get to be a part of that category of people who are imperfect. That's why we tell each other all the time, there's no perfect people allowed here. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, as they were in the habit of doing, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Here are those Pharisees. Again, if you were here with us last week, I talked about how the early church sort of says there's Pharisees that are part of the early church, and how stunning that was. Because here we're reminded again that the Pharisees were exactly the people that probably gave Jesus a migraine more than anybody else. Because they should have gotten it, but they were so consumed by their rules, they couldn't see Jesus for who he was. He was constantly in conflict with them. And conflict in that way that you're trying to teach somebody something and they're just not getting it. The sort of conflict you get in with your kids when you try to do long division with them. And they're just, nobody's getting it, and it's very, very frustrating. Right? This reminds us of why that little piece from last week was so amazing. So, Jesus takes the opportunity. He senses or hears their muttering, and he decides, okay, teachable moment, here we go. And he tells 3 different stories, and they all kind of have the same basic structure. Something is lost, people go on a hunt, and a celebration happens when it's found. Here's the first story, verse 3, chapter 15. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go to that lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls all of his friends and neighbors, and he says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. Simple structure for the story, right? Sheep gets lost. Shepherd leaves the 99 to go look for the sheep, finds the sheep, brings it back, throws a party. Story number 2. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents. And there are a couple of things that we should understand. First thing that we should understand is there's no lack of responsibility by the shepherd here in the first story, right? Like sometimes I think we think that one shepherd is there and there's 99 sheep and they're in an open field and they're all vulnerable, and he goes away to go find that one sheep. That's not how it was, right? Some people, when we start talking about, helping people find a clear road to God, they get nervous, right? They get nervous because it's like, well, what about us? We'll talk about this a little bit more in a little bit. But what about us? Here's what's really important to know. Shepherding was a communal experience. In other words, this flock had multiple shepherds, multiple sets of sheep, all grazing together for one village. It was a communal event. And so when that one shepherd goes, he doesn't just leave and ignore the other 99 sheep. Sorry, getting ahead of myself here. Mixing my metaphors. He doesn't leave the 99 sheep. He leaves them in the care of others that are part of his community, right? The church is designed to be a place where we sort of learn to care for ourselves, right? When it's time for us to go, it's time for us to look outward, it's time for us to do the work that we're called to. We don't start ignoring each other. No, we start caring for each other. Some of us do some of that work. Not everybody is engaged all the time. And some of us do the work of making sure that everybody is cared for, connected, and safe. It's really important to know. It's important to know that both of these stories had the chance to shock the people who heard it. Because the truth is, the party that they throw after they find what they lost was probably worth more than what they were searching for. Right? People are listening and go, how foolish is that? You went on this big search, you found your coin, you came back, and then you threw a party that cost you 2 coins. Wouldn't it have just been better not to go looking for the coin in the first place? Right? It's a fair critique. If you think about things from our perspective, right? But I think one of the things that we're supposed to see is that God has a different economy. He has a slanted priority towards those who are outside of our own walls. In a sense, it's a risky economy, right? It's not a risk-averse economy. The problem is that a lot of churches tend to be risk-averse, tend to want to huddle up what they have, and not put anything on the line when it comes to looking. We're interested in our own safety and comfort. It ought not to be lost on us how much God invests in the celebration of the accomplishment of the mission that he goes on. Right? And by the way, the risk isn't just in spending the things that he has. The risk was in trusting other people to help him find it, which continues today, right? It's risky to engage human beings in looking outside of themselves because we all have a natural tendency to worry about us. And if that was true 2,000 years ago, it's certainly true in our hyper-consumeristic culture that we're all a part of and can't get away from. That's who we are. We need to be aware of it because if we're not aware of it, we end up being the guy you never want to be in all of these stories. You end up being the older brother, right? We skip down. The next story Jesus tells is very, very, very popular. Most of you are probably familiar with it. The story of the prodigal son is known to people well outside the church. It's a cultural phenomenon. People understand what this story is. So I'm not going to read that whole story. I'm going to skip down until the part where maybe we're not as familiar with. Here's what it says, starting in verse 25. Meanwhile, so the meanwhile is after the son insults his dad, asks for his fortune, goes away, spends it, ends up eating with pigs, and decides that it would be better for me to be a slave in my father's house. So I come back after his father receives him and welcomes him back into the family and starts the party to celebrate, right? Same structure. Something is lost, something gets found, and a party gets thrown, right? All of that happens. Meanwhile, the older son was out in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants. And he asked them, "What is going on?" He said, "Your brother has come home. And your father has killed the fattened calf because he was back and safe and sound." The older brother became angry, refused to go in. So his father went out to him and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving away for you. I never disobeyed you once. Yet, you never even gave me a goat." So, you have to understand, right? Calves are bigger than goats, right? So the fattened calf was and it says the fattened calf. In other words, there's just one. One of the family's most precious things, one of the things they're saving for that moment, whatever that moment is. Maybe you have something in your house that you just hold on to and you save, and it's not for anything in particular, but you know the day that you're going to go get it. You know the day that you're going to use it. You know the day that you're going to enjoy it. That was this. They had lots of goats, but one fattened calf. You didn't even give me something that you have lots of to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, notice it's not his brother anymore, this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? This is the what about us crowd. This is the I'm not getting fed crowd, which are really, really common complaints when churches get really serious about looking outside their own walls. And in some ways, I get it. Like, I understand where it comes from. You know, like, you're all already here, right? And there's no guarantee anybody else is joining us. We cannot predict the future. So maybe we should just enjoy our community and the company that we already have. Maybe that's enough. You know, maybe it's not important to sacrifice. Maybe it's too much work to worry about somebody we don't know yet. I think it's important to know the older brother, he's not evil. He's probably just exhausted and frustrated. He's done everything right. And he can't understand God's economy. He can't understand the Father's priorities. He can't understand that oftentimes grace just isn't fair. So much better than fair. Right? So much better than fair. It's so unfair that that man who hung on a cross next to Jesus, guilty as the punishment he was receiving, could say to Jesus, "Remember me in your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Of course I will." So maybe we can see ourselves siding with the older brother from time to time, right? And that would be fine, except Jesus seems really, really clear here. Like abundantly clear. That God's plea, God's intention, God's desire for us is to understand his heart and to adopt his heart for other people. Right? God's heart for mission, which is just a way that we say, like, what are we trying to do together, right? What's God's purpose and plan? God's purpose and plan is to redeem us, redeem the world, right? His plan is to redeem, and he has a church through which his primary intention is for them to help in the redemption work that he intends to have for all the people we know and all the places we know and the entire world. And once you're a part of the church, once you're a part of the 99, yes, the 99 does represent people, right? Once you're a part of the 99, then your job is to join in searching for and celebrating when the lost come home. The older brother should be at the center of the party, not off in the corner worried about the difference between goats and fattened calves. This understanding of how God works is supposed to stop us from caving in on ourselves, right? It's supposed to keep us from deflating. Is Luke's balloon still here? I love that he tied it to a giraffe. This is funny. Okay, right? So how come the balloons are inflated? Why are the balloons inflated? What's that? For the baby. Yes, the balloons are inflated for the baby. Now, why are the balloons inflated? Why are they not flat? There's something inside, right? Right? If we take what's inside out, what happens to the balloon? The force from the outside will collapse the balloon, right? That's what's going on. When balloons don't have anything inside of them, right? There's so much air on the outside that they can't inflate. So what do we do to inflate them? We put stuff on the inside to push against the force that wants to collapse the balloon. Yes? Right? Everybody understands this. You all know how balloons work. You also know that these really super pretty balloons are not going to be super pretty forever, right? Because there is tiny holes that the helium is trying to escape from, even now, right? And if you don't keep adding air to them, one day we'll come back and they won't look this cool and they won't remind us of hockey night in Canada and they won't make us wonder if Luke's going to have a baby. They'll just be flattened on the floor, right? Debbie wants to be really clear that Luke and Debbie are not having a baby, okay? Right? Likewise, there are forces pushing on us, pushing on churches all the time that just would have us collapse inward, right? We have to put an inordinate amount of effort to push back on those walls so that the balloon doesn't collapse. Our understanding of how God works, our acceptance that once upon a time all that unfair grace was pointed directly at you. Once you were the lost person in the story. We all were. Once we were not familiar with God. We were not in relationship with God. That's how it starts. And any of you who have a relationship with Jesus had some people working with God, spending an inordinate amount of energy in your direction so that you would understand who He is and come to know Him personally. It's only by understanding who God is, how He works, what He values, that we can continue to have the motivation to do what's necessary to make sure that what's beautiful doesn't collapse. And here's how the Bible talks about, here's how Jesus talks about the Father's love. While the Son was still a long way off, His Father saw Him and was filled with compassion. He ran to His Son, threw His arms around Him, and kissed Him. See, this is even more astounding than anything we've read before, because this is shattering people's view of God as Jesus tells the story. Because the Father was the most respected figure in Jewish community. Still is in many Middle Eastern communities, right? And the Father's status was tied to His dignity, right? He is supposed to be the immovable, unshakable Father, measured and in control always. And running is not the work of fathers. Not in this culture. It was beneath the Father's station for Him to run. Running is something that children and servants and young men do. Depending on how old you are, maybe you're starting to identify with that. Running is the work of younger men. In this culture, especially, and their clothing tells you about it. It still does to this day, right? You know, men in those cultures, they wear, garments that go all the way to their ankles, right? And young children often are wearing things that are tied up and girded around their waist and their upper legs, right? This long robe that they wore was to keep them from being immodest. And in order to run, you have to hike up the robe, which was extremely inappropriate, right? It was actually considered shameful for a man to show his legs in public. If you don't believe me about this, guess what? It's in the Bible. 2 Samuel. chapter 10, verse 4, if you want to look it up. So when Jesus says that the Father ran, you have to imagine that the air goes out of the room. They just couldn't imagine a father doing that. The shock of the impropriety of it shows that this man was willing to lose face in front of his entire community. Middle Eastern scholar Kenneth Bailey famously described this as a moment of self-humiliation born out of love. So the father sees the son from a long way off, which means he was watching. He was hoping against hope. He was spending his days watching the road intently, knowing that it was probably less likely that the son comes home now than that he stays away. And he runs to him because he's going to stop a ceremony that the community believes is their responsibility. See, you probably have heard this before, but like this son coming to the father and asking for half of everything that he has. I can't see some of you because the balloons are in the way, so I'm going to move them. I mean, it was a huge insult. Can you imagine? Can you imagine going to your parents and saying, I know you're not quite dead, but can you just refinance the house and give me my part of it now? Can you imagine? You know, that's essentially what this guy did. Hey, Dad, I know you're not dead yet, but what I'm owed when you die, I want it now. You know? And not only would it have offended him, but it offended everybody who loved him. And so the ceremony was called a kazaza. So if this guy tried to come home, if they saw him, they would take a clay pot and ceremonially smash it in front of them to show that you've broken your relationships here. You're not welcomed here anymore. The father running to the son, wrapping his arms around him and kissing him, stops that humiliation from happening. He absorbs the hit that the community feels it must give him. He embraces, he kisses him, he absorbs the cost of reconciliation. All of that happens before the son apologizes, which means it isn't the son's apology that sets the father's agenda. The father's agenda was set by him long before the son ever came home. Grace runs out to meet the son. And the religious elite would have been super clear about what this meant and how offensive it was. And their question would have been, are you saying that God is like that? A patriarch who runs, bears his legs, and embraces the defiled son before he ever apologizes? And Jesus' answer is a resounding yes. That's exactly what God is like. He is redefining God. Not as distant, but personal, close, and in pursuit of us. And we probably shouldn't miss that what Jesus is doing here is setting the stage for what he's about to do. Right? God comes, wraps himself in human flesh, lives among us. He came to us. This is the extraordinary part out of many, but maybe the most extraordinary part to me about the gospel, about the story of Jesus, is that while we were still a long way off, God took it upon himself to come, to be with us, to be near us, to take on everything that we deserve for the relationship that we broke. He ran to us. He came to us. He died for us. Before any of us said thank you, before any of us said I'm sorry, he came to us. And so when you read the story, you must read, while we were still a long way off, the Father ran to me, to you, to us. I don't know what it feels like to you to lose something. But when it happens to me, I get anxious, frustrated at myself for doing it again. Do you know what inevitably happens? As my mood goes this way, those people who love me, even though I'm being a royal jerk, get up out of their seats and start to help me look for what was lost. They understand what's going on in my heart because they know me and they love me. So they help. And that's the point I'm trying to make this morning. I'm going to ask the band to come back up. If we understand God's heart, if we read these stories and try to really grasp what God is trying to say to us, what Jesus was trying to teach, what he's still trying to teach us, is that while we were a long way off, he came to us, and there are still people a long way off, and we are supposed to expend an inordinate amount of risky energy in the direction of helping people find their way to the Father. When something is lost to somebody we love, we get up and help. What would it feel like if when you were going through that, nobody offered to help? We would probably be moderately offended by that at some point, wouldn't we? So the question that we should ask ourselves, just personally and individually, are we committed to helping? And what does our level of commitment to helping say about the state of our relationship to somebody we say we love? That's the hard question, right? If we don't care about the things that the people we love care about, how much do we love them? I know that seems uncomfortable or harsh, but that's the inordinate amount of energy that's required to do the job. It probably wasn't comfortable for the father to sit on that porch and look down that road every day, because he wouldn't have done it in private, right? People knew he longed for this son who had offended him deeply to come home. He was putting his hope in something that seemed so foolish. But it was unmistakable, undeniable. And if his other son had understood, maybe his other son would have got out of the field and gone looking for his brother. Maybe that's what we should see. Because there was another opportunity for the older brother to play a part in the story his father wanted to tell. And then you can do all the seemingly dutiful things, still be detached from the heart of your father. One of my favorite tellings of this story is a book written by Tim Keller, who unfortunately passed away a number of years ago. brilliant, brilliant theologian, amazing storyteller. I saw him speak once, and 5 minutes into his talk, I'm like, man, I wish that guy was my pastor. Like, just so seemingly in touch with the heart of God. And his book, he called The Prodigal God. We always call the story the prodigal son, right? You know, the son is the reckless one, which is kind of what prodigal means. Which always made me laugh, because the song that we're going to sing next is a song called Reckless Love. And when it came out, it was like controversial. People were like, can we really call the love of God reckless? Yes, because Jesus did. Right? Like it's there for everybody to see. The love that God has is just as prodigal as the son's behavior. It's just as reckless in the most beautiful way. Reckless, overwhelming, never ending. And so we just wanted to set a couple of moments aside at the end of today. We're going to sing 2 more songs. And I would just love for each one of us to do like a bit of a heart check. Like, where are you at as it relates to the people who aren't here? I asked you last week to think about, look at the empty chairs in the room. Who is it that you wish sat in those chairs? We want to partner with you to do everything we can to see those people here, not so that the pastor's ego will get bigger or the church's budgets will get bigger or any of those sort of cynical things that people maybe start to think when we start talking about the church growing. Nope, because there are people who need to know the love of their Father. Period. And what I hope continues to happen here is that our love for those who aren't yet connected to God continues to grow in the way that God's love continues to grow for them. So why don't you stand with us? We'll take a few moments and we'll sing some songs.